I think that the intense antagonism that people on both sides of the gay debate feel and often display is truly regrettable. Some people were asking me, and they were not joking, whether I would like to have some bodyguards to escort me for after the service for these few weeks. They suggested a few big burly chaps like Pastor Hong Peng, and I said to them, no need. Anything happens to me, if to suffer for the sake of Christ, that's supposed to be a good thing. The Bible says rejoice. Well, I think the suggestion is well intended, even if it's a little too cautious. It does show that how bad the state of affairs is, that so many people who disagree over this issue have come to see the other side as enemies and can no longer relate to each other, let alone talk to each other cordially anymore. And that's why I decided to do this series. In fact, I decided to do this series like nearly a year ago, and I'm just excited that we have finally reached here. My goal is really to try to get as many people as possible to think deeply about this controversial topic and to engage one another in a civilized manner. For Brighton Church members, my desire for you is not just that you will develop a clearer understanding and conviction about what the Bible actually has to say about homosexuality, but just as important, what it has to say about the way that we ought to treat people whom we disagree with, even people whom we think are doing it wrong. However, I also want to use this series to reach out to those of you who are gays and those of you who might not be gay but who strongly advocate gay rights, who think, and very often people in this group think that the church is oppressive and discriminatory. I might not be able to change your minds on many things, but I hope that you would at least get to understand better why fair-minded, compassionate, and reasonable people can embrace the Christian position on homosexuality, even if you yourselves are unable to accept it. My daughter once invited a classmate to come to church, and she dismissed her. She rejected her outright and said that I would never endorse a God who oppresses my gay friends. Maybe some of you feel that way as well. But at least, you are hearing this, you are in church. And if you keep coming, I think it's very likely you discover that the God you reject is really not the Christian God at all, not the God revealed in the Bible at all, but an unworthy caricature that even I or everybody else ought to reject. Now, my point is simply this, that prejudices and misunderstandings abound in both camps, on both sides. You only have to go online and read a small part of the online remarks over this issue, and it's so vitriolic, it's so toxic. There is such a great amount of self-righteousness, of condemnation, of name-calling, and so much fear on both sides of the divide. And I believe that it shouldn't be this way, and it doesn't have to be this way. I believe that all of us need to be more humble, thoughtful, and constructive in our approach, even when we disagree with one another. And that's why today, for this first message in the series, I'm not going to present the Christian position, on this issue. I'm not going to push, and advocate the Christian position on this issue. I'll take the next 2 weeks to explain what Christians really believe or what the Bible actually says about this issue. But today, some of you may have questions. So as we go along this series, some of you may have questions about it, and we invite you to post them on a link on our church website that we have set up, and feel free to ask any question. I can just go to the link. I guess I'm blocking. You can't really scan the code, but simple. I just go to our website and add in the truth with love, and I shall try my best. I can't promise to answer all the questions. I shall try my best to incorporate answers to your questions in my next 2 messages. But for today, what I want to do is I want to lay the groundwork for a more harmonious engagement between people on both sides of the argument. And in this regard, I propose that there are 3 things that we all need to do. The first is this: we need to recognize the good intentions on the other side. Recognize that there are people with good intentions on the other side. Because it's very easy to lump all people into one indistinguishable mess, especially when we disagree over an issue. And straight people are Well, unfortunately, I think more guilty of this. Straight people often think and talk as if all gay people are obsessed all the time with sex, that they are promiscuously sleeping around, looking for people to have sex with, and that they are generally out of control. And that is just totally inaccurate and unfair. Okay, and I know that I'll feel really unjustly accused and very indignant if someone says, as we often hear people say, that all Christians, all churches are homophobic, hateful, and discriminatory towards gay, because that is simply not the case. And well, before I go on, let me just explain that, okay, there's a lot of nuances about terms, about the words that we use, and I cannot take too much time to go into all that, but I'll just use the word gay to refer to both gay and lesbians, because I understand that's what people in the community do, okay? And among people who have same-sex orientation, there is a whole spectrum of beliefs and practices, just as there is for straight people. Okay, on both sides of the divide, there are people who practice committed, loving relationship that they want to be lifelong and exclusive. In both camps, there are people who sleep around wantonly. In both groups, there are people who love God and who want to do their best to please Him. And there are also people who don't believe in God at all and can't be bothered what He has to say about the issue, or don't even believe that He exists. Now, I believe that we should always judge people who disagree with us by their best intentions. Most people take a certain position on an issue because they have positive and reasonable motivations. Now, no doubt, okay, I'm not naive about this. On either side, there are people who are bigoted, there are people who are really dogmatic, there are people who are judgmental, but we must not let their negative voices drown out the good intentions that most people do have for the stand that they take. So, let me just first talk to the straight people here. First of all, especially those of us who are Christians. Why are some people so passionate about promoting gay rights, about advocating gay rights? Now, it's very easy for us to just dismiss them as being rebellious and godless generation, or that they are just young and ignorant. Instead of doing that, I think we need to see that they are often motivated by good desires. And I will just name 3 of these good desires. First of all, I believe that they take their stand because they value freedom, okay, which is what we all value, right? Whether we are straight people or gay people, we all believe that within reasonable limits, people ought to be able to do what they want to do, not shackled by externally imposed constraints, whether these constraints are imposed by tradition, by the church, or by law. And while we may differ in what constitutes reasonable limits on freedom, we can at least affirm that the desire for people to have greater freedom is a good thing, not a bad thing, right? Secondly, many people support gay rights out of compassion. And they recognize that it is always difficult to be in the minority, right? As straight people, we tend to assume that gay people deliberately choose to be different, that they have a choice. But if we take the trouble to talk to most of them, you'll find that most of them struggle to accept it when they discover that they feel same-sex attraction. And a lot of them grapple with that for life. They grapple with a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of fear of rejection. Okay? They cope with the response of their family members, and if they're in church, it's even worse, right? Very often, they need to cope with the response of their church friends and leaders. And they're very often deeply hurt by the cruel jokes and demeaning remarks that are made about gays. And it is a fact that many teenagers contemplate suicide because of their struggles with same-sex attraction. And my point simply is this, that it is not easy to be a gay person in a world in which you are the minority. Okay? And we ought to be glad that people feel compassion for those who are struggling. Okay? And that's a good thing, and we ought to give people credit for that. Finally, and I think this is most important of all, and I'm going to talk more about it, okay, in the following weeks. People who stand up for gays, I think they're primarily concerned about justice. Justice. They feel that it is unfair. To them, it's obviously unfair that gays are not allowed to love and to freely marry just like the rest of us. There are many things they cannot do. They cannot form a family. You need to buy a HDB flat. or at least until they reach a certain age, right? Or they cannot adopt children legally. Even their private sexual activity is criminalized. And I believe that's why many young people are sympathetic towards promoting and expanding gay rights, because young people, being idealistic, they feel, or they often sense injustice the most keenly. And that's a good thing. Okay, and even some of us believe that there is justification for the differentiations that are made, we ought to recognize that the idealism and the desire for justice is a good thing. Okay, and the Bible, the Old Testament especially, is big on this, that God is a God of justice. And if people stand up for something because they want to stand for justice, I think we should recognize that it's a good thing. Okay? Now, I hope that short summary will help us to see that a lot of the advocacy for gay rights that's going on is driven by people with good intentions. Okay, even if we disagree with their views. They value freedom, they value justice, they value compassion, and these are values that all of us should promote, especially for those of us who call ourselves Christians. Okay, because that is what God requires of us, right? To love justice, the mercy, and walk humbly before Him. On the other hand, I would say to people, on the other side, the people who support gay rights, that instead of just demonizing the other side, it is also important to see the good intentions behind their stance. Again, let me just mention 3 good intentions that people who take a stand against gay rights have. First of all, many people oppose expanding gay rights because they sincerely believe that the traditional family structure is crucial for the well-being of society. They're afraid that gay unions, if they proliferate, they would undermine the basic building blocks of society. And I think you cannot just dismiss that fear outright. The fears are not completely unfounded. After all, all the world has ever known until this point is a traditional family made up of male father, female mother, and children. Can two female parents form effective family units, stable structures to raise children, and continue to be the building blocks of a society? I think the simple answer is this. Okay, whatever you want to say on the issue, we simply don't have sufficient evidence to be confident about the long-term effects of that. And therefore, it is, I think, not unreasonable for people to have reservations, even grave reservations, about such a major deviation from what has always been the norm. Okay, it is, I think, a fear that's not totally unwarranted, right? Secondly, there is a concern that gay sex poses a serious health hazard. Again, such fears are not baseless. People are not just being paranoid. If you need some hard evidence on that, okay, I know the media seldom highlights this, but if you need some hard evidence, you only have to refer to the website of the United States Center for Disease Control, the CDC. Okay, I think you can trust the CDC to be impartial about this issue. And okay, I'm just trying to be brief here. So here are some very quick facts I pulled out from the CDC website. Okay, and this is what the CDC says about the situation in America. Men who have sex with men, okay, we abbreviate it MSM, make up more than half of the people living with HIV. And to put that in perspective, okay, it's generally estimated that gay people make up about 2% of the population. So if you think about that, that's staggering. Okay, that more than half people with HIV are men having sex with men. In 2016, gay and bisexual men accounted for 67% of the 40,000 new HIV diagnosed. 2/3. Okay? Number 3, MSM are disproportionately impacted by syphilis, HIV, and other sexually transmitted diseases. Okay, we can debate about, and there's a lot of debate going about the cause, the physiological cause, the way the human body is constructed, the sociological cause about the stigmatization and discrimination, all that. But, okay, this is a fact. This is a situation. Men who have sex with men are 17 times more likely to develop anal cancer than heterosexual men. That's frightening. Right now, I don't want to go further into these figures because, as I said today, I'm not trying to argue for any particular position. All I'm showing you is that there really is a valid serious public health concern about the dangers of gay sex. It's naive for people to say that nobody gets hurt. Okay, it's not true. Okay, a lot of people do get hurt. Okay, you cannot simply dismiss those fears out of hand. Thirdly, and most importantly, many straight people oppose gay sex because they are concerned about morality. And they sincerely believe that gay sex is immoral in itself. Now, before any of you start protesting, okay, I'm not saying that they are correct. Okay, at this point in time, at least I'm not saying that they are correct when they think that I'll address the question of morality, whether it is right or wrong and who decides next week. That's why my second message is entitled, Who Decides? Who Says? All I'm saying now is that whether straight or gay, all of us want really to live in a morally upright society for ourselves and for our children, right? And that if people take a certain position because they believe that morality is important and ought to be upheld, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, even if we don't agree with their position. Now, for those of people who are Christians, you need to understand that they are under orders from Jesus Christ to go even further than that. Jesus tells Christians in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, he says, "You are the salt of the earth, but the salt loses its saltiness. How can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." In other words, Jesus commands his followers to be agents of moral preservation and change, and to make a stand against what they understand to be immoral, not out of self-righteousness, but out of a concern for the greater good and the glory of God. But I think you don't have to be a Christian to want to have a righteous society, to live in a righteous society, to promote a righteous society. Everybody wants that, right? We can have a lively debate over the morality of gay sex, but at least let us recognize that the desire to promote morality is a positive intention. Okay, so whatever it is on both sides of the issue, I think we all need to try and acknowledge the good intentions on the other side. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think all of us need to examine our own assumptions. Okay, we need to examine our own assumptions. Many years ago, before I left for work in the morning, I agreed to meet my wife at the end of the day at the Bugis MRT station control, so that we can make our way to her parents' home in Tampines for dinner. As usual, I arrived early. As usual, my wife was late. So I stood there and waited very impatiently. And to make matters worse, a group of very pesky Christians came up to me and tried to convert me. And I told them, look, I'm already a very committed and active Christian. Why don't you go and share the gospel with people who need it, who actually need it? And they began to cast doubt on my beliefs. Are you really sure? How do you know that you're really a Christian? So after a while, I didn't want to entertain them anymore, and they got angry with me, and they started insulting me. Say, I call yourself Christian, I behave like that. I was so frustrated because I couldn't go anywhere else. I was a captive audience, because I had to meet my wife there, right? And so the more they went on heckling me, the more angry I got with my wife. Finally, after waiting for more than an hour, I gave up. Okay, you must understand these were the days before mobile phones. Okay, that's how old we are. It's hard for you to imagine those days, but it was like that. There was nothing more I could do. So I thought, okay. I got on the train. I took the train all the way to Tampines. I went to my in-laws' house. I stepped in. My wife was sitting there eating. And that made me even madder, And I was going to really let her have it when she said, "Where were you? I waited at the station for over an hour for you, And I was stunned when she said that. It's like, what? And then I thought back about the station, and I realized with a shock that I had waited at the Lavender MRT station instead. At some point in our lives, all of us have made wrong assumptions. But because we are so sure of our position, we get extremely upset by people whom we think have gotten it all wrong. Okay, obviously wrong. And our anger, our indignation, our self-righteousness make us even less able to see the flaw in our own position or to see the merits in the other side's case. And that's why I think that in approaching controversial issues like this, it's important for both sides to examine their assumptions and listen more carefully to what the other side is saying. And so this time, let me first speak to my fellow believers, right? Now, surveys show that a significant majority of Christians in Singapore believe that homosexuality is wrong, it's a sin. And we know, even just interacting with Christians, that many Christians feel very strongly about it. However, if you were to ask these Christians, ask Christians generally, for the basis of their strong convictions, most of them would not be able to substantiate it beyond saying vaguely that, well, the Bible clearly condemns it, or that the church has always historically taken a firm stand against it, so it must be wrong. Now, let me just say that I think if we're going to say that somebody else's conduct is sinful, that somebody else's lifestyle is unbiblical, I think it's important that we have a better grasp of why we believe what we believe than just making blanket statements like that. The Bible has a very interesting, gave us very interesting insight about truth and reception of the truth and interpretation of the truth. You find in Acts chapter 17, verse 11, it says, "Now the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true." They didn't take what he said at face value. Now, this is very interesting for me, and I might as well just say this, take this opportunity to say this to the Brightonites, that, look, as a preacher, I'm used to receiving all kinds of feedback and criticism. Now, most of the time, people don't actually come up to me face-to-face or write to me directly. Most of it is reported to me by our leaders who tell me that, this my CG member, they disagree with what you preach, and they're upset by what you said. Now, I just want to say that I'm fine with that. I'm fine with feedback. I'm fine with even criticism. But there are also different kinds of criticism. Because if somebody says, look, what Pastor preached is not in line, not in alignment with the Bible, I will pay careful attention to that. And I would humbly evaluate my own position in the light of what the Bible says. I'll go back to what the Bible says and say, is the person correct? But again, a lot of times, the criticism is over a matter of personal preference, or over people. Many of you came from, another church, and that's the way they did it over there, and that's not the way we do it over here. Or there are people getting upset by the truth being spoken. Okay, that it really doesn't bother me. Of course, it's important to speak the truth in love. Okay, which is the title of this series. But as Christians, we are all bound. Those of us who call ourselves Christians, we are bound by the authority of God's word. The Bible says it, that settles it, I preach it. Okay? And then you can take it whichever way you want. But here's the catch. Most Christians are not able even to say which parts of the Bible actually deal with homosexuality, or what those passages really mean. Those of you, honestly, those of you who are Christians here, can you tell me, okay, we don't do Kahoots, but how many of you, can you tell me how many passages in the Bible mention homosexuality? How many? Any guesses? Okay, there are 6, okay, and have you all read all 6 of them? Do you know where they are found and whether we have traditionally interpreted them correctly? And have you actually considered other proposed interpretations by very respected Bible scholars and carefully evaluated them for yourself? Have you also thought deeply about how the Bible and Jesus would want us to relate to homosexual people? Or why is it that there are churches and Christians who believe that the Bible doesn't actually condemn homosexuality, that it is, at least some forms of homosexual practices are acceptable to God? Okay, are they all just heretics? Are they all just people who don't love the Word of God and don't have a high view of the Bible? No. Actually, most Christians have not done their homework in this regard. And if you have not, let me just ask you, why are you so sure? Christians, why are you so sure that the Bible and God condemns homosexuality? Why are you so sure about your position? Why do you feel so passionately about it? But of course, the same goes for the other side as well, right? I mean, the same goes for the many assumptions that we make about gays as well. Huh? Like, many of us believe that they can change if they really want to, or that they are not capable of having long-term committed exclusive relationships. Now, it's important to examine such assumptions and be open-minded enough to consider counter-arguments and the evidence, and to change our minds if we are wrong about certain things. In fact, let me just say this, some of you will really be uncomfortable. Let us change our mind. If really we study the Bible, and the way that we've always thought, the position that we've taken is wrong, then we ought to change, because as I say, the Bible is final authority for us. Now, the same is true for the other side as well. Why is it that most pro-gay people accuse those who disagree with them of being motivated by homophobia, discrimination, and mindless tradition? Or that the assumption that Christians and churches hate gays and lesbians. Have you considered that it is possible to love people and yet disagree with their choices and behavior? Here are some other assumptions I think you would do well to examine more closely. Okay, that all gay people are gay simply because they are born that way. Okay, because that's now, I think, assumed to be true. Is that a correct assumption? Or that if they are born that way, then it's natural for people to be gay. If something is natural, then surely it must be right. We cannot condemn it. Is that a valid assumption? Or how about the assumption that being pro-gay is progressive and enlightened, and taking a stand against gays is being oppressive and narrow-minded? How do you know that is true? Also, have you assumed that homosexuality must be acceptable just because your friends, the media, your university professor, Taylor Swift, Google, Starbucks, all these people think so? How do you know they're even right? I'm not saying that all the assumptions you make are wrong, okay? I'm just saying that they all bear closer scrutiny. Don't accept them at face value. Right? If you are going to condemn people on the other side and be so strong about what you believe in and take such a strong stand, I think it's only fair that we examine our own assumptions on both sides of the argument. Both sides really need to think more deeply about the issues. And I think if only we will do that, we will all approach each other with greater humility. And that's a good thing, right? Because humility helps us to talk to each other better and relate to each other better. And which leads me to my final point. Okay, wow, very fast. Okay, point number 3. We need to look beyond issues to people. We need to look beyond issues to people. Several years ago, I had a gathering of my secondary 4 class. It was the first time that we were gathering after 30 years, graduating. And I noticed that one of my friends was very awkward with me. And I was surprised because we had been good friends all through secondary school, all through junior college, even all through law school and university. He had left shortly after graduation to stay and work in New York, and I heard from other classmates that he lived there with a gay partner. But all the same, I was genuinely glad to meet him after such a long time, and I tried to relate to him normally. Okay, it didn't bother me. I mean, the fact that knowing that he's gay, didn't stop me from relating to him as a friend. But he was very awkward. And after the event, I was surprised, or I understood when another of my classmates explained that when this guy heard that I had become a pastor, number one, he couldn't believe it. Number 2, he became very reluctant and fearful to come for the gathering. Okay, and this third guy, this other third party, this other classmate, had to persuade him to come. Okay, in spite of the fact that I was there. When I heard that, I felt really saddened by the situation. And it gave me an insight into how gay people often perceive the church and people like me, preachers. Of course, they know that we don't approve of homosexual conduct, but that's not really what keeps them away. What they fear is that we disapprove of them as real people. Okay, in his heart, he believes, maybe from past experience, okay, with Christians and churches, that I will reject him as a friend and as a human being. Not just that I'll disagree with his sexual life. Okay, it's not just an issue of morality, it's an issue of personhood. Okay, as a church and as Christians, have we taken our stand on this issue in such a way as to communicate that not just that we disagree, okay, with this, we think it is sin, but we reject you as people. In this whole debate, the problem is that we often depersonalize. Okay, it's true on both sides. We often depersonalize people on the other side. But homosexuality is not just an issue to fight over, take a stand on, okay, protest about. It's about real people who want to be accepted and loved. Every gay person, just like every straight person, is somebody's child, somebody's sibling, or somebody's good friend. There is a lot more to them than their sexual orientation and even their sexual conduct. It doesn't define their entire identity. Okay? And it's the same for straight people. Right? That's why I always have mixed feelings about this. When people try to mobilize other people to make a stand for this. Now, every time the Pink Dot movement gathers people at Hong Lim Park, every time some church urges their members to wear white, to make a point, it is easy to forget that we are dealing with real people, not an impersonal issue. Okay, it's easy to paint the other side out as the threat, the obstacle, the enemy. Now, I'm not saying, okay, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's wrong to make a collective statement or gather people for a cause or to advocate for the laws that you believe should be passed and upheld in our nation. I'm just appealing to everyone to remember that we must look beyond the issue to the people behind them, behind the issues. And for those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus Christ, especially, I think we need to imitate him a lot better than we are doing. Because Jesus shows us how we ought to deal with people who... Okay, Jesus shows us how he dealt with people who were considered in his time by his culture to be the worst sinners. Okay, I'm not saying gays are the worst sinners, and I certainly don't think so. I'm just saying that Jesus loved even those who were dismissed by the religious establishment as being hopelessly sinful, beyond redemption. Whether it was a pagan Roman centurion who represented the idolatrous enemy of the against the Jewish nation, whether it was the infamous town prostitute, whether it was a woman caught in adultery, or the ultimate scum of the earth in Jewish culture, a tax collector, Jesus sought them all out. Okay, he took the initiative. He went to them. He related to them. He loved them. He served them. He met their needs without endorsing their sinful conduct. But neither did he focus on it. Right? He didn't call them out on it. He didn't focus on it. He showed us, he modeled for us how we ought to relate to people whom we disagree strongly with, and even people whom we think are practicing a sinful lifestyle. Now, all these people knew that they were despised as sinners by the religious types in their society. But the interesting thing is that they were all attracted to Jesus, and Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, a religious teacher. Okay, and I think it ought to speak powerfully to us that people who were not at all like Jesus liked Jesus. Because I think it's not the same for us, right? It's not true for us. Because though Jesus was never Jesus never compromised God's standards. Okay, he always upheld the law, but he always led with love. And all these people that he interacted with, they were transformed. Not because Jesus called out their sinful behavior or beat them over the head with the word of God, but because they were touched by his love, his friendship, his acceptance. Now, I think it says something about our modern church scene, that we'll all be hard put to find any prostitutes or loan sharks in our midst. Okay, maybe there are some, but they are so frightened they did not reveal who they are. That's the state we are in. Now, in our emphasis ought to be on the right side of the issues. Have we failed to see the people behind the issues? Jesus not only modeled such love, he commanded it of us. Okay, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 43, he said, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." Okay, again, I just want to clarify, gay people are not our enemies. But in the current controversy, a lot of hurtful things have been said on both sides. And many of us Christians feel uncomfortable to relate with gays for fear that it will be interpreted as endorsing their beliefs and their practices. I think if we follow the example of Jesus Christ, we should be doing the very opposite. Okay, we should stop making jokes about gays, using derogatory terms on them. And if we know relatives or friends who are gay, Jesus would want you to take the initiative to reach out to them and relate to them as real people and serve them as Jesus did. And I think here's a good principle to live by, really. The more strongly we disagree with somebody, the more we need to let them know that we love them in spite of the disagreement. When I did my basic military training, that's a long time ago, many years ago, I was assigned to this unit and this company in the SAF for people who were not fit for normal service. Okay, I was physically, I was very fit, but I was put there because of extremely high myopia. Okay, and the danger that my retina would detach anytime. Okay, so it's really a company filled with all kinds of chapalang people. It's very interesting. My buddy, the guy who sleeps on the bunk, the bed above me, he was Dr. Benedict Tan. Okay, you may have read of him in the newspapers recently. He's going to lead the Singapore Olympic contingent next year. The irony, he was there too. He was downgraded because he had a bad arm fracture when he was young. And there were many other kinds of people. There were people who were severely obese, okay, which make it very good every time we have to run because really, they hold everybody back, so it's very relaxing. There was one guy who was deaf in 1 year. Okay, he was deaf in 1 year. He would I remember because he would set his alarm clock at 4 a.m. every morning and got everybody woken up and they'd be cursing him because he couldn't hear his own alarm. It was really a company of misfits. And then there was a gay person. In fact, there were two gay persons I met in BMT. Today, I'll just tell you one. I think next week I'll tell you about another one. Okay? And, somehow they were all attracted to me. Okay? I guess must be my stunning good looks. Yeah. Anyway, this is really bizarre, So, this person, he came, he reported for NS. That day, he reported in MS. He came in a blouse and in a skirt, okay, with long, curly, dyed hair. And I didn't even realize that it's a male, it's a guy, okay, until the other people all started taunting him. And then I don't know how they do it nowadays, but in those days, they process us like cattle, And then this station, you pick up your thing, and then we go to the station where they shave your head, right? They shave your head. And it was a terrible situation because this person sat there, okay, and she wept, she wept when her hair was being cut, the locks were falling to the floor, and she was weeping. And all the guys around me, my fellow recruits, were just jeering and mocking and laughing and making fun of him. And, they allowed him to use the commander's toilets. And every time he went to take a shower, they'll be disturbing him, saying terrible things about him. And, I think the SAF deals with these issues. Probably they have progressed and are better in dealing with such issues. But in those days, that's how they dealt with it. Gays were considered misfits. Okay? People like the rest of us, just not fit enough to be active, regular soldiers. And the funny thing was that after several weeks in the BMT, I don't know how he got my phone number, my home number. In those days, as I said, we had no mobile phones. But he started calling me. Okay, every time we book out, he'll call me. And then he'll ask me to go out with him. And then he'll ask me to go to a place called Niche. Niche, N-I-C-H-E, Niche. Now, I didn't know what that was, but people later told me it was a disco for gays back in the 80s. Each time he asked me, I would politely decline. But now in hindsight, if I could turn back the clock, I would have accepted his invitation. Okay, maybe not to Niche. But I would have befriended him rather than shunned him. Back then, my fear and prejudice against gays blinded me from seeing his need for acceptance and friendship and the suffering that he was going through on a daily basis. Okay, I didn't join my fellow recruits in taunting him and inflicting on him all those terrible things. But neither, as I evaluated this, neither did I go out my way to befriend and serve him the way Jesus would have done. Okay, I was very zealous and careful and right about standing on what I believe was truth, the right side of the issue. But I ought to also have treated him better as a person to be loved. Now, I believe that Christians, really, we can do a lot better than what we have done. I want to say that I'm thankful that we have I know this for a fact, we have quite a number of people who feel same-sex attraction in our church community, in our cell groups. And that, by and large, I think they feel no need to hide their situation and their tendencies and their orientation. Okay, I've been to several cell group meetings where people candidly share their struggles with their sexual orientation. And I thank God for this because I know that as a church and as Christians here, although we do not approve of gay practices and we are duty-bound to take a stand on it, okay, I know that in this community we also people also know that they are loved and they are accepted as friends and people. Okay, that being gay does not identify them. Okay, it's not the sum total of their identity, and that they are real persons. Can we just have the worship team up here? Okay. Now, for those of you who are gay, or for those of you who strongly pro-gay, I hope that in the same way, okay, after hearing what I said, you will come back, keep coming back to do two things. Okay, first, I hope you'll come back to understand why we, Christians, consider homosexual conduct sinful. It's not because we hate gays or are self-righteous about it, but that actually the issues are really far bigger and much more complex than what most people perceive and the way that presents it. That it's just about love, it's just about freedom, it's just about giving people what they want. Actually, the issues are far bigger than that. It's simple as that we wouldn't be having this controversy. Okay, so I hope you'll come back and hear with an open mind what I have to say over the next 2 weeks. If you have gay friends, please invite them and tell them, assure them that this is not a gay bashing thing. Secondly, I hope you'll come back to experience our community. Okay, because truth is important, right? But love can only really be experienced in community. I believe that most gays keep away from church, not primarily because the church condemns their homosexuality, but because the church treats them as less than human. They feel rejected as people. And I just want to assure you, we may not agree with you, but we do love you. Because we believe that truth must be spoken with love, and love must always be practiced in truth.